There was a moment. You may not remember the exact day, but you remember the sensation, the way it settled into your chest and stayed there. Someone looked at you, someone you trusted, someone whose words had weight in your life, and they said the words, maybe it was direct. You are too sensitive. Maybe it was quieter than that. A sigh, a look, a slight pulling away that communicated everything without needing a single syllable. Maybe it was in a meeting when your voice broke and theirs did not. Maybe it was at the dinner table when you could not hide what you were feeling and the room went still with something that felt like discomfort. Maybe it was in a relationship, the one you gave everything to, where the words came in the form of, "Why do you always have to make things so heavy?" And in that moment, chosen one, something inside you went very quiet. Not because they were right, but because you were not sure anymore if they were wrong. And here is what they never told you about that moment. It was not the first time. It had been happening for years, in different rooms, different voices, different relationships, sometimes from people who loved you, sometimes from people who barely knew you, but always with the same verdict. You take things too personally. Stop overthinking this. You don't have to feel everything so deeply. Why do you care so much about people who don't even care about you? You're being dramatic. You're too emotional. You need to toughen up. Each phrase landed differently. Each one left a residue. And here is what residue does. It accumulates after enough repetitions, after enough rooms, after enough relationships where the message was the same. You started to adjust, to pre-apologize for the feelings before they arrive, to monitor yourself, watch your reactions, edit your responses in real time, to try, in 100 invisible ways, to take up less emotional space. Because the world had communicated, loudly, consistently, clearly, that the way you were wired was something that needed to be managed, contained, corrected. Chosen one, I need you to stay with me right now, because what you were told in all those rooms, in all those voices, was never God's assessment of you. There is a verdict about you that was spoken in heaven before anyone on earth had a chance to open their mouth. And the gap between what heaven said and what the world said is the entire distance this message is going to travel. Not a slight correction, not a gentle reframe, an overturning. Because what the world called your greatest liability, the depth of what you feel, the fullness of how you care, the way you cannot simply choose to stop caring, God calls something entirely different. And in the next 40 minutes, if you stay, if you listen, if you let this reach the places they wounded, you are going to hear the verdict that was always true, the one that was written before you were born, the one that has never changed, the one that no room and no voice and no eye roll has ever had the authority to overrule. God never said you were too much, and it is time you heard that from the one who made you. Let me ask you something, chosen one. When the world talks about strength, what image comes to mind? I will tell you what image has been placed in the culture. The person who never cries in public, especially not over someone else's pain, the one who can receive terrible news and remain composed, the one who walks into a room heavy with grief and comes out unchanged, the one who can turn off the care at the end of the day and not carry it home, the one who maintains, who manages, who never lets anything show. This is what the world calls emotionally mature. This is what the world calls strength. And for years, perhaps your entire life, you have been measured against that standard. And because you could not meet it, because you would not meet it, because something in you refused to perform composure at the expense of genuine feeling, you have been made to feel that you were the problem, the deficit, the liability, the one who needed to grow up, toughen up, get it together. But here is the problem, chosen one. The measuring stick was wrong. God never designed that standard, and He never asked you to live up to it. In 1 Samuel chapter 16 verse 7, God is speaking to Samuel. Samuel is standing in front of the wrong person. He is looking at Eliab, tall, strong, the obvious choice, and God stops him. He says, "Do not look at his appearance or at the height of his stature, because I have rejected him." Man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. 4 words that overturn everything the world built. The Lord looks at the heart, not the controlled face, not the composed posture, not the one who maintained their professionalism while another person was bleeding. The heart and chosen one. The one who feels deeply, the one who weeps when others shrug, the one who cannot walk past pain without it following them home, the one who wakes at 2 a.m. still processing a conversation that everyone else forgot by dinner. That is the one whose heart is loudest in God's hearing. That is the one He looks at and sees exactly what He was looking for. Think about what it means that God looks at the heart. It means He is not running an audition for composure. He is not scouting for the most controlled response in the room. He is not handing out crowns to the people who got through the week without crying. He is listening for resonance. The heart that vibrates at His frequency. The heart that breaks when He breaks. The heart that carries the same weight He carries about the broken things of this world. And chosen one, that heart is yours. The sensitivity they made you feel ashamed of is how heaven identifies its own. It is how God hears you in a room full of noise. Not the loudest voice, the deepest resonance. You were not wired wrong. You were tuned specifically for a frequency most people cannot access. And the God who listens at that frequency has been hearing you your entire life. So, before we go any further, chosen one, I need you to hold one question in your mind, not to answer it right now, just to hold it. What if everything you were told about your sensitivity was the wrong interpretation of the right thing? What if the label they put on you, too sensitive, too emotional, too much, was never God's language? What if it was simply the language of people who had never learned to feel that deeply and were, without knowing it, measuring you by the ceiling of their own capacity? What if the problem was never the depth of what you carry? What if the problem was always that the people around you were not yet equipped to receive it? This message is the reinterpretation, not a comfort session, not a sympathy speech, a verdict from the one who made you about what He actually made. There was a man who felt deeply and who was not ashamed to say so in public, in print, for all of history to read. His name was C.S. Lewis, Oxford scholar, Cambridge professor, Christian apologist who once mocked Christianity and then surrendered to it completely at the age of 33. A man who had survived the trenches of World War I, who had watched friends die in the mud and carried that with him for the rest of his life. A man who fell in love late, deeply, recklessly, and then watched his wife die of cancer while he held her hand. A man who then sat down and wrote about the grief with a precision so raw, so exact, so unflinching that the book has never been out of print. Lewis did not theorize about deep feeling. He lived it. He documented it. He was made uncomfortable by it and wrote about the discomfort. He doubted in writing and showed his doubt to the world. He raged at God on the page and did not go back to soften the edges. And yet, from inside that extraordinary depth of feeling, he saw something that the people who never went that deep could not see. Something that was invisible to the composed, accessible only to the ones who felt what others called too much. In his work, The Weight of Glory, a collection of essays that many scholars consider the finest concentrated writing of his career. Lewis wrote these words, and I want you to hear them slowly. It would seem that our Lord finds our desires not too strong, but too weak, not too strong, too weak. Let that inversion settle. The world stood in front of you, looked at the depth of what you feel, the length of your grief, the reach of your empathy, the breadth of your care, and said, "This is excessive." Lewis, and the God whose mind Lewis was reflecting, looked at exactly the same thing and said, "No, you are still falling short, still not feeling as fully as God designed you to feel, still reaching toward a depth of love, of care, of compassionate presence that your soul was built for, but has not fully arrived at yet. Chosen one, what the world called your greatest excess, God calls your unfulfilled potential. You are not feeling too much. You are still feeling too little for what God placed inside you. Let me make this personal. Think of the moments, the times you wept for someone else's pain, not because it was expected of you, not because anyone was watching, but because you could not help it, because your heart went there before your mind gave permission. The friend who lost someone, and you sat up until 3 a.m. even though you had work the next day. The news story about a child in another country that you could not stop thinking about for weeks. The colleague who made an offhand comment about struggling at home, and you were the only person in the office who noticed. The stranger at the grocery store whose face told you something was very wrong, and you prayed for them the entire drive home. The world called all of that extra, unnecessary, an inefficiency of feeling. God called it operational. Your heart was not malfunctioning in those moments. It was doing exactly what it was built for. And every time it happened, every time your soul crossed the boundary that others maintained, it was not a weakness escaping. It was a gift being deployed. If you have ever been told you feel too deeply, if there is a version of your story where you have spent years apologizing for the way God wired you, I want you to do something right now. Scroll to the comments and type the 2 words, "I feel deeply." Not as performance, not to be seen, as an act of agreement with what God said about you before the world got to say anything at all. You are not alone in this room, chosen one. There are people watching this right now, in different cities, different countries, different time zones, who have carried the same label for the same amount of time, who have tried to feel a little less, who have practiced composure in the mirror, who have told themselves, "This is the season I finally get this under control." And then something happens. A song, a story, someone else's grief, and the depth comes back, because it was never leaving. It was never a phase. It was always you. Let that room see you tonight. Type the words, "I feel deeply." Now I want to show you something from Romans chapter 12, verse 15. And I want you to pay attention to what God actually said, because most people read past it without realizing what is in it. He says, "Rejoice with those who rejoice, mourn with those who mourn." God did not say, "Maintain appropriate emotional boundaries while supporting those in grief." He did not say, "Stay present but not affected." He did not say, "Care for others without letting it cost you anything personally." He said, "Mourn with," not "observe their mourning from a respectful distance," not "offer resources and referrals and check-in messages." Go down into the grief with them. Let it touch you. Let it change the atmosphere inside you. Let it matter in the way that matters. That is a divine command, chosen one, not a suggestion, not an option for the emotionally advanced, a command. And you, the deep feeler who has been told your whole life that the mourning was excessive, have been the most obedient person in the room. The ones who prided themselves on composure The ones who talked about healthy emotional distance, they were not stronger, chosen one. They were not more mature. They were not further along in their spiritual walk. They were disobedient because God said, mourn with, and they said, I will monitor from a safe remove. God said, enter in, and they said, I will observe from the doorway. God said, let it touch you, and they said, I will manage my exposure. And while they were maintaining their composure, you were in the room, you were on the floor, you were present, you were obeying a command that most people have never even recognized as a command. You were doing the thing God asked His people to do, and the world called it weakness. Heaven called it faithfulness. Every time you stayed when others left, every time you picked up the phone at an unusual hour, because something in your spirit said, call them now. Every time you walked into a gathering and immediately sensed the tension under the surface that no one was naming. Every time you prayed for someone who had not asked you to, because their pain was sitting with you and would not let you go. Every time you drove home from a conversation and wept in the car for someone else's situation. Every time you woke at 2 a.m, carrying a weight that was not yours, and instead of putting it down, you prayed with it. Chosen one, that was not your weakness making itself known. That was your assignment operating. Not the assignment you chose, not the role you auditioned for, the assignment that was placed in you before you were born, that runs through you like a current, that cannot be turned off because it was never a setting. It was a design. So let me say this to you plainly, without cushioning, without softening, without the careful hedging I might otherwise use. You were not too emotional, chosen one. You were the most obedient person in the room. In the room where everyone maintained, you felt. In the room where everyone managed, you stayed. In the room where everyone monitored their exposure, you went in. And God, who was in every one of those rooms with you, did not watch any of it go unnoticed. Every moment is in His record. Every tear is in His bottle. Every midnight is in His ledger. Not filed under excess, filed under faithful, filed under present, filed under exactly what I asked for. But there is something else I need to show you. A second dimension to this sensitivity that most people have never been given language for, because everything we have covered so far has been about the outward direction of the gift, the way it moves from you toward others. But the gift also moves inward, and what it deposits in you as it does is something God intends for a use you have not yet arrived at. Every wound you received while feeling deeply for someone else, every moment of pain you absorbed that was not yours to carry, every season of empathy fatigue, every loss of sleep over someone else's situation, every tear you wept for a grief that was not your own. God was not watching passively. He was filling you with something specific, something irreplaceable, something that can only be formed through the exact combination of deep feeling and genuine encounter with pain. Something that would one day become the most powerful thing you could offer to a person you have not yet met. In 2 Corinthians chapter 1 verse 4, Paul writes something with the precision of a blueprint. He says, He comforts us in all our troubles, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves receive from God. Read the architecture of that sentence. First, God comforts you in all your troubles. Not some, not the acceptable ones, not the ones that look good in a testimony. All of them. The ones you cried about alone. The ones no one validated. The ones that seemed too private or too embarrassing or too much even for prayer group. God was in all of them. Second, that comfort becomes capability. The comfort you received does not simply heal you and evaporate. It is stored. catalogued, converted into a resource, and third, it is specifically designed for deployment so that we can comfort those in any trouble, not just the same kind you went through, any trouble. Because when you have been comforted by God in your own specific darkness, you carry a light that is not generic, it is precise, it is personal, and it works in the dark because it was made there. You are not just a recipient of comfort, chosen one. You are being made into a carrier of it. There are people you have not yet met. Let that land for a moment. There are people whose names you do not know right now, whose faces have not yet entered your life, whose stories you cannot imagine because they have not intersected yours, but they are coming. And when they arrive, when they are in the valley you already crossed, when they are in the grief you already know the geography of, when they are asking the questions you asked God at 3 a.m. and thought no one else had ever asked, they are not going to need theory. They are not going to need a curriculum on grief or a 5-step recovery plan. They are going to need someone who has been there, who knows what the bottom feels like, who can say, without performance, without formality, without a single note of rehearsal, I was in that exact place. I could not see the exit. I thought it was permanent. And then, slowly, quietly, without announcement, God moved. And I'm still here. And you will be too. Chosen one, the map of where you have been is the exact map they need. And God has been making sure it was drawn precisely in the ink of every experience you went through, so that when they need it, it will be complete. C.S. Lewis wrote something about this in The Four Loves, a book that many consider his most intimate, because it was the most personal, written near the end of his life, after joy, after grief, after everything. He wrote, "Friendship is born at the moment when one person says to another, 'What? You too? I thought I was the only one.' 3 words that end isolation. You too. And chosen one, that is your assignment. Not a general assignment, a specific one. To be the person who says you too to someone who has been sitting alone in their experience for longer than they can sustain. To walk into the room where someone is silently drowning, not making a scene, not asking for help, just quietly disappearing, and to say, without needing to perform anything, 'I know this water. I have been under it. You are not the first to be here, and you will not be the last to surface.' That is the gift, chosen one. Not just the capacity to feel deeply, the capacity to take what you felt and turn it into someone else's rescue. Lewis understood it. God designed it. And he gave it specifically to people like you. If this is landing right now, if something in your spirit is saying, yes, this is the language I've been waiting for, I want you to do something. Go to the comments, type 2 words, you too. Not because you are agreeing with a theological proposition, because you are choosing to be part of the mission. Because somewhere in this space, right now, there is someone watching this who has never had anyone say you too to them, who has sat alone in what they feel for so long that they have started to believe it is a sentence, a life term, not a season. And when they see your 2 words, it will be the moment Lewis described, the moment when isolation breaks. Type the words, you too. Let this community be what God designed the gift for. I want to pause here and say something that does not always get said in these conversations. Deep feeling is not romantic. It is not the soft-focus image of someone gazing pensively out of a rain-streaked window. It is not a gift that arrives with a bow. It is exhausting. You know this. You have lived the other side of it. The side that does not appear in the testimonies. The compassion fatigue that hits on a Tuesday afternoon and does not lift for 3 days. The relationships that drained you because you gave more than was returned. The moments you wished, genuinely wished, that you could simply stop caring and could not. The times the sensitivity felt like a wound rather than a gift. The seasons where you looked at the people around you who seemed lighter, less affected, less burdened, and you felt not chosen. You felt cursed. I know, and God knows too. He did not design this gift as a convenience. He designed it as a calling, and callings, the real ones, always cost something. They cost exactly as much as they produce, not a cent more. But every cent of the cost is accounted for in heaven's ledger. Nothing you paid was lost. Now I need to take you somewhere deeper, somewhere that goes further back than your first memory, further back than the first room where someone called you too much, further back than the beginning of your story. Everything we have covered up to this point happened after you were born. But there is a verse that does not start after. It starts before. Before your first word, before your first feeling, before anyone had a chance to form an opinion about the way you were wired. And in that before space, in the space that existed before you existed, something was already being decided about you, not by your parents, not by your environment, not by the combination of genetics and circumstance that produced the person you became, by God. In Jeremiah chapter 1 verse 5, God says, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you, and before you were born, I consecrated you." Before I formed you in the womb, before a single cell had divided, I knew you, not knew of you, not knew about you, knew you personally, intimately, with full awareness of what He was making and full intention behind every specification. And before you were born, before you existed in any form that the world could observe or label or assess, I consecrated you, chosen one. That word, consecrated, it does not mean God approved of you when He got around to it. Consecrated means He declared you set apart for sacred use, before you had done a single thing to earn or lose it. Before anyone had a chance to say a word about you, God had already spoken. The world developed a theory about your sensitivity. The theory sounded medical, psychological, reasonable. It used words like temperament, constitution, emotional regulation, nervous system activation. And some of those words may be accurate descriptions, but they are not the origin story. The origin story is not in your childhood. It is not in what happened to you or what was done to you. The origin story is in a moment before all of that. When God was looking at what He was about to make, and He said, "This one will feel what others walk past. This one will sense the atmosphere of a room before anyone speaks. This one will stay in the grief when everyone else finds a reason to leave. This one will love with a completeness that leaves them vulnerable in ways most people never risk." And God said, "Yes, this is exactly what I need for what I have in mind." The sensitivity was not an accident of development, chosen one. It was a specification written into you before anyone else had access to you. The most tender assignments in God's economy, the ones that required the greatest presence, the deepest staying, the most costly love, have always gone to people like you. The ones who could not perform composure when someone needed a witness to their grief. The ones who could not offer a service-level response when someone needed a soul-level presence. The ones who could not keep a professional distance when what was called for was complete, costly, uncalculated entering in. God does not send the composed into those places. He sends the consecrated, the ones He formed before the womb to feel what the assignment required. The ones who could not look away because they were built not to look away. And chosen one, you are one of those. You were not chosen despite your depth. You were chosen because of it. You were chosen for it. The depth I is the credential. There is something I want to tell you about the chosen ones who feel deeply, the ones who feel most deeply, the ones who were given the widest emotional range, the deepest well of compassion. They are also the ones who are the most at risk of misunderstanding their own gift. Because the world has been so consistent in its misdiagnosis, so loud, so certain, so unanimous in its verdict, that after enough repetitions, even the most spiritually grounded person can start to wonder, what if they are right? What if this depth is not a gift, but a pathology? What if I've been calling a wound a crown because that felt better than admitting the wound was real? I want to speak directly to that doubt right now. The doubt does not disprove the gift. The doubt is the enemy's most sophisticated attack on the people God has most specifically equipped. Because if he can make you doubt the gift, if he can make you spend the rest of your life managing and suppressing and apologizing for the very thing God placed in you, then the assignment goes undone. The people who needed the you too never receive it. The comfort that was being stored never gets deployed. The consecration is buried. Do not bury it, chosen one, not tonight. And now, as we move toward the close of this message, I want to show you something from the Psalms, something that will change how you think about every tear you have ever cried. In Psalm 56 verse 8, written by David, a man who wept in caves, who wept in defeat, who wept in his greatest failures and his greatest victories both. David says to God, you have kept count of my tossings. Put my tears in your bottle. Are they not in your book? Your tears are in his bottle. Not metaphorically, not as poetic language for something vague and general. God keeps a record of your tears. He counted them. He preserved them. He filed them in a book with your name on it. And chosen one, I want you to think about what goes into that bottle. Not just the tears you wept for yourself, every tear you ever cried for someone else, the midnight tears for a broken friend, the tears in the car after a phone call that left you broken on their behalf, the tears at 3 a.m. over a situation you could not fix but could not stop caring about, the tears you wept alone that no one saw, no one validated, no one acknowledged. Every one of them is in his bottle. Every one of them is in his book. None of them evaporated. None of them were wasted. None of them were excess. And here is what that means. Practically, everything you have ever felt, every grief that seemed too large for one person to hold, every empathy that left you emptied for days, every compassion that cost you something and gave you nothing visible in return, none of it was wasted. Not a single drop. God has a ledger, and in that ledger, next to every feeling the world labeled excessive, there is a different word. The one God wrote, the tear you cried in the hospital parking lot for a stranger's family. Faithful. The night you could not sleep because someone else's situation had you in prayer, present. The relationship that drained you because you gave more than was ever returned, counted. The morning you woke up, tired from someone else's weight, seen, every one, marked, not as excess, not as weakness, not as dysfunction, as obedience, as faithfulness, as the work of a consecrated vessel doing exactly what it was made to do. See, S. Lewis wrote, one more thing I want to give you. He wrote it in a way that sounds almost offhand, as if he was stating something so fundamental he could not believe it needed to be said. He said, you don't have a soul, you are a soul, you have a body. Chosen one, let that restructure how you hear the words too emotional. The body is the container. The soul is what you actually are. And here is what the world was doing when it told you to control your emotions. It was asking the soul to perform like a body, to manage, to restrain, to maintain a polite, controlled, professionally appropriate surface, while the real you, the eternal you, the soul that God formed and consecrated and knows by name, was right there, doing exactly what it was designed to do. They had it backwards. The soul, by nature, by design, by what it is built for, feels everything. It was made for a world where love is full, where grief is witnessed, where no tear is uncounted and no feeling is wasted. You are not too emotional, chosen one. You are too alive in the part of you that was made for a world with no too much. And you are not wrong for feeling it here, in this world that has not yet arrived at that one. You are simply ahead of schedule. Father God, I come before you right now on behalf of every chosen one listening to this message, every person who found this video tonight, because they have been carrying a wound they did not fully have a name for, the wound of being told they were too much, of being made to feel that the very thing you placed in them, the depth, the sensitivity, the gift of feeling what others walk past, was a liability instead of a calling. I ask you right now to do what only you can do. Reach into the memory of every room where those words were spoken, the classrooms, the dinner tables, the relationships, the churches, every space where someone looked at their depth and called it a defect, and I ask you to replace that verdict with your own, the one you wrote before they were born, the one you have never retracted, the one that says set apart, consecrated, trusted, chosen. Heal what was broken in the moment the label landed. Restore what was lost in the years they spent trying to feel a little less. Redeem every midnight that went uncelebrated. Return to them the full awareness of what you placed in them and why. And let them know tonight, in whatever quiet place they are receiving this, that the depth was never the problem. It was always the gift, in the name of Jesus. Amen. Chosen one, before you close this video, I want to give you 3 things to carry with you. 3 declarations. Clear, unhurried, final. The first one is this: you were not too much. Not then, when they said it. Not now, when you still sometimes hear it in the back of your own mind. Not ever. What the world called excess was God's precision. What they called weakness was a sacred equipment. What they called too emotional was the most accurate reflection of God's heart. In a room full of people who had learned not to feel it, you are not too much, and you do not need anyone's permission to stop believing the verdict that was never God's in the first place. If this message reached you tonight, if something in you shifted, even slightly, between the beginning and now, I want to invite you to subscribe to this channel, not as a number, not as a metric, as a belonging, because every message on this channel is made for the ones who feel what others cannot name, the ones who carry what others put down, the ones who stay in rooms where others find polite reasons to leave. This channel was made for the deep feelers, for the ones who were told there was too much going on inside them, for the ones who are slowly learning that what was going on inside them was never too much. It was always an invitation. Subscribe so that the next message finds you first, because there is always more to say, and it was always made for you. Rest now, chosen one. You have carried enough for one day. What was taken from you, every wound received, in exchange for feeling what God asked you to feel, has already been recorded in a book with your name on it. Your sensitivity was never your shame. It was your signature. The specific way God signs His name through your life, in every room you stayed in every grief you entered, in every tear that fell for someone who needed a witness and found you. Your tears were not weakness, they were worship. And the God who keeps them all, the God who has known you since before the womb, is honored by every single one. Rest. You were never too much. You were always exactly enough.